Hello everyone, welcome back to this channel. I hope you're all doing well and excited to learn something new today. If you're someone who wants to speak English fluently, confidently, and naturally, then this lesson is for you today. I am going to teach you how to think in English, which is one of the most important steps to becoming a fluent English speaker. We all know how frustrating it can be when we have to stop and translate sentences from our native language into English before speaking. It slows us down, makes us feel less confident, and often leads to mistakes. Wouldn't it be amazing if you could skip that translation process and just think in English from the start? Well, I'm here to tell you that it's possible by following 4 simple stages. You can train your brain to think directly in English. Trust me, this will make a huge difference in how you speak before we start. Don't forget to subscribe. This way you won't miss any of our lessons that will help you on your journey to speaking fluent English. Now let's get into today's lesson, how to think in English. First step, think in verbs. English stage. 1. Think in verbs. The power of action. Words. The first stage of learning to think in English is to focus on verbs. Verbs are the action words in a sentence. They describe what's happening. Why do we start with verbs? Because action is all around us. And if we can think about what's happening in English, we can start forming sentences in our heads more quickly. Let's take an example. Imagine you are walking through New York City, specifically in Central Park. You see people everywhere, all engaged in different activities. What are they doing? Some people are running, others are talking. You see a dog chasing a ball, and someone is feeding pigeons. These actions are described using verbs: run, talk, chase, feed, by observing the actions around you. You can start thinking about them in English. This process of observing and identifying actions is something you can do anywhere. Whether you're standing at a bus stop in London, waiting at a traffic light, or sitting in a cafe in Paris, there are always actions happening around you. For example, on a busy street in Tokyo, you might see people walking quickly, someone riding a bicycle, or a group of friends laughing. You can mentally note these actions in English: walk, ride, laugh. But what if you're at home, where there's not much happening? You can still practice thinking in verbs by imagining scenarios or using pictures. For instance, look at a photo of a family picnic. What actions do you see? Maybe they are eating, playing, or relaxing. And even when you're indoors, you can practice identifying actions by thinking about what you might do in different situations. Imagine you're in your kitchen. You might be cooking, cleaning, or washing dishes. Key practice tips: set aside 5 to 10 minutes each day to practice thinking in verbs. Pick a different place each day and focus on the actions happening around you. As you do this regularly, you'll train your brain to think about actions in English, making it easier to describe what's happening in the moment. Second step, think in nouns. Think in nouns, naming the world around you. Once you've practiced thinking in verbs, it's time to move on to nouns. Nouns are words that name people, places, things, or ideas, just like verbs. Nouns are everywhere. Everything around you has a name. And if you can think of these names in English, you'll be one step closer to thinking and speaking fluently. Let's take an example from a different city. Imagine you're in Sydney, Australia, standing by the famous Sydney Opera House. As you look around, you see the building, the harbour, and many tourists taking photos. You also see a boat in the water and a few seagulls flying above. Each of these things is a noun: building, harbor, tourists, boat, seagulls. It's important to practice thinking in nouns wherever you are. If you're at a market in Delhi, India, you might see fruits, vegetables, spices, and vendors. These are all nouns that describe the objects and people around you. Even if you're just sitting in your room, you can look around and identify nouns. For example, you might see a table, a chair, a book, and a laptop. Another great way to practice thinking in nouns is to describe what you're carrying with you, what's in your bag. Maybe you have a phone, some keys, and a wallet. If you practice naming these objects in English, it will soon become second nature over time. This will help you think faster and more clearly in English. Third step, think in sentences. English key practice tips: spend a few minutes each day naming the objects around you in English. Whether you're outside at home or even traveling, challenge yourself to identify everything in English. If you're visiting Barcelona, Spain, look around and name things like buildings, bicycles, cafes, and tourists. The more you practice this, the more your brain will automatically think. In English Stage 3, think in sentences, connecting verbs and nouns. Once you're comfortable thinking in verbs and nouns, it's time to move. Move on to the next step. Thinking in sentences, this is where you start putting verbs and nouns together to describe what's happening around you in full sentences. At this stage, it's important to start simple. Don't worry about making long, complicated sentences. Just focus on creating short, clear sentences that describe what you see. For example, if you're in Cape Town, South Africa, looking at Table Mountain, you might say the tourists are climbing the mountain, the sun is shining, the wind is blowing. These are simple, but they allow you to practice thinking in complete sentences. Now let's imagine you're in Toronto, Canada, sitting in a park. What's happening around you? You could describe the scene like this. A family is having a picnic. The children are playing with a ball. The birds are flying in the sky. These sentences are short, but they effectively describe what's happening around you as you become more comfortable. You can start making your sentences longer. For example, if you're in Berlin, Germany, walking near the Brandenburg Gate, you might say a group of tourists is taking pictures of the monument. Some of them are listening to their tour guide. While others are checking their maps, this sentence combines multiple verbs and nouns, giving a fuller description of the scene. The goal here is to get used to thinking in sentences instead of just words. This will help you when you're speaking, as you won't have to stop and think about each individual word. Your brain will automatically form sentences in English. Fourth step, stages of thinking, achieving fluency through practice. By now you should have a clear understanding of the 4 stages of thinking in English. Think in verbs. Focus on action words and describe what is happening around you. Think in nouns. Name the people, places, and things you see in your surroundings. Think in sentences. Combine verbs and nouns to form short, simple sentences. And think in paragraphs. Bring everything together to create detailed descriptions of scenes and events. Each of these stages builds on the previous one, helping you develop the ability to think directly in English without the need for translation. It's important to practice each stage regularly, as this will train your brain to process information in English more. Why think in English naturally? Why thinking in English is essential for fluency. Now that you understand the stages, let's talk about why this method works when you first start learning English. You likely translate from your native language. This is natural, but it creates a delay in your speaking. Instead of speaking smoothly, you have to pause and think about what to say, which can make you feel less confident by practicing thinking in English. You eliminate that translation step. Your thoughts will naturally form in English, making your speech faster and more fluid. When you can think in English, you'll also find it easier to have conversations, express your ideas, and respond quickly in discussions. For example, imagine you're at a job interview in London, and the interviewer asks you to describe a challenging situation you faced at work. If you're thinking in your native language, you might need a moment to translate your thoughts into English. But if you've trained yourself to think in English, you can respond immediately and confidently without hesitation. The same goes for everyday conversations. Whether you're chatting with friends, giving a presentation, or even ordering food at a restaurant, being able to think in English will make the process much. This is enough for today. Next part will be uploaded soon. Please subscribe.